once and future and current attendees of the Cascade Writers Conference. We're here with another one of our pro Get to Know You interviews today, and our guest today is Arley Sorg, editor of Locus Magazine, agent, and publishing expert, just kind of all around. Arley, thank you for taking the time today and for being one of our Cascade Writer pros. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing excellent. I'm really glad to be here with you and excited for our conversation. Can you tell our, again, once and future attendees a little bit about who you are and your journey in the writing world and what you're doing these days in that writing world?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Arley. I am a agent at KT Literary. I co-edited Fantasy Magazine. We got nominated for a few awards for that. Senior editor at Locus, associate editor at Lightspeed and Nightmare. I do interviews for Clarkesworld. I have a column with FNSF. And I do some different kinds of organizing stuff in the community here and there. I also do a lot of teaching. I taught at Clarion West last year for week 5. I do stuff for Odyssey, so on and so forth. My first convention was at BayCon. I met a bunch of people. Because of people that I met there, that's how I got involved in the industry. Friends of friends, opportunities, moments that came up, pretty much everything, even being an agent, was really about happenstance, circumstance, coincidence, and in some cases, just knowing people and having treated people right along the way, having been respectful and kind to people along the way.
Yes, well, you're certainly excellent at that particular skill set, which makes you a great interviewer and makes you great at finding good stories amongst all the slush out there, I think, which you've certainly done with your various magazine gigs and everything. I am curious, why did you choose to switch into an agent role? I haven't had a chance to ask you this, and how has it been? Like, how is that agenting world different from, editing a magazine? Because they both have to do with story acquisition and story presentation. But yeah, what are the differences in those two jobs, and why did you decide to do agenting?
Yeah, the agenting, I was invited to a cocktail party, a private party by a friend, and it was her agent's party, and me and the agent hit it off. Sarah Megabo, we became friends. I had no intention of being an agent, never thought about being an agent, but we were talking about things I've done in genre when we were just hanging out in Colorado. And she was like, oh, you know what? You'd be a good agent. And so apparently a lot of things that I'd done, a lot of the skills that I demonstrated were things you need to be a good agent. There are also a lot of other things that I didn't know, but a lot of that is the bolts, the nuts and bolts, the administrative stuff that they can teach me along the way. The things like taste, the things like understanding genre, understanding the field, that's the stuff that's harder to teach somebody. And being an agent, there's a lot of striking similarities between that and the short fiction field, and there are a lot of important differences. For one, imagine as short fiction writers if somebody submitted the stories for you instead of you going through, looking at magazines, staying current with magazines, and deciding where to send. Imagine if somebody did that for you. That's kind of one of the things that an agent does. But agents also do a lot of unseen work. For example, I haven't even made any money off. I have 2 clients and I haven't made any money off them, but I've done a lot of work over the last year. I've been an agent for 1 year and I've done tons and tons of work. And some of that is, you know, like meeting with editors, maintaining relationships, making sure that I understand the field, making sure I know who needs what. Some of it is editing work. Some of it is reading through slush. So there's also a lot of administrative work that goes into being an agent, a lot. That's hard to explain and really boring. But, the things that are similar is understanding the field, having a sense of taste, having a sense of what's going on, having a drive. You know, you have to have a drive to do this. As I said, I haven't made any money. I've been doing this for a year. I've made $0, done lots of work. You know, most people aren't going to deal with that. You know, most people are like, no, for free, no. And even if, you know, imagine, even if I have one of my clients' manuscripts, something a lot of people don't know is that you can have a great manuscript, you can believe in it, and you can send it out on sub and maybe no one buys it. Just like in the short fiction market. Maybe you wrote an awesome story. Maybe your story needs work, maybe your story isn't as awesome as you think, but maybe it really is awesome. And you can sub it everywhere, and for whatever number of reasons, nobody buys it. And there can be so many reasons. And it's the same with being an agent. I can get an awesome manuscript from one of my clients, I can believe in it, I can send it to the right people, and you know, it still might not sell. That's the nature of the business. So those are similarities. And the fact that both short fiction markets and the novel markets are constantly changing, they're constantly in flux. As short fiction writers, you know, you have to keep track. Like, I'll still get people emailing me at Fantasy being like, hey, how do I sell the story? And I'm like, you don't. Our final issue was last October, you know, so don't sub to us. Here's Submission Grinder, try that. I get people subbing to Locus, and they don't publish fiction. So agents have to keep an eye on the field. Authors have to keep an eye on the field too. Otherwise, they waste their time, they waste the editor's time, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the other differences, at least for me, is that the stakes are really different. You know, even though short fiction on an individual basis is very important to the author, but novels are, especially first novels, are things that people usually spend years writing. And, you know, statistically, most people are not going to sell their first novel, but the statistics don't change the way that people feel about their first novel. And maybe they'll sell their third novel or their fourth novel, or they'll write a seventh novel and they'll look back on those earlier novels later on and they'll be like, yeah, those weren't ready. I see that now. But in the moment, you know, authors almost always will have so much, you know, so much emotion, so much work put into that novel. And so when I'm slushing queries or manuscripts, I just feel a sense of the stakes being a lot higher. And so I always felt a lot of responsibility as a magazine editor with short fiction, but as an agent, I feel an even greater sense of responsibility, a greater onus to make good decisions and to treat authors as well as I possibly can.
That sounds like definitely the right philosophy and the right approach. And I think that's really valuable information, Arley. Thank you for sharing that, because I feel like so many authors are out there in the querying trenches, right? And everybody thinks, oh, if I can just get an agent, if I can just get an agent, everything will be okay. And it's like, it sounds like the agent, I mean, it's got to be just as competitive for you guys out there, because like you're doing two jobs, like you said, and half of it's for no pay. You have to first find the stories that you can sell, and then you have to go sell them. So like you have to believe in them, but then you also have to convince other people to believe in them, which can, I imagine, be a lot harder because people that you're selling to are coming from like a different perspective on story too, right? I mean, they're kind of often probably looking at it as a product in ways that maybe you don't have to initially. Can you speak to that difference in perspective a little bit and what that looks like?
Yeah, well, I think there's a juncture there, like, um, and I think agents will also be thinking about whether or not they think a book can sell and at what level they think it can sell. And then you have the acquisitions editors, which is who the agents are speaking with. You know, for example, maybe you're trying to sell it to Saga Press and they have a handful of acquisition editors. Or maybe you're trying to sell it to Erewhon, or you're trying to sell it to, you know, Del Rey. And the acquisitions editors are usually also still really passionate about story and about books. But they, especially at bigger houses, they usually have to sell it upstairs. And when you transition that book from the acquisition editor's desk to the upstairs, that's when it becomes statistics and numbers and all about sales. And that's when it becomes a conversation about product. And so the agent has to be mindful of that to some degree and has to be able to speak to the potential to sell. And the acquisitions editor, once they believe in a book, they've really got to try and sell it upstairs. So even if an acquisitions editor loves the book, it doesn't mean that it will get purchased, because especially, at a bigger house, indie presses operate a little bit differently. But because maybe the department upstairs says, oh, quote, the numbers don't look good, end quote, and they either can't buy it or they have to offer a really small amount. So there are different stages, and depending on the house you're looking at, the way that the book is perceived definitely changes. And it kind of begins with the agent, but it really transitions more and more the closer you get to sending that book upstairs. But
No.
I personally think that authors should not really think about that at all. I think authors should only think about it in terms of understanding the way the industry works. But in terms of writing the book, I don't think authors should think about, oh, is this marketable? Will it make the numbers look good? Will, the upstairs department's a big publishing house want it? I think authors should just focus on writing the best book they can, on tapping into their passion, on doing the things that they really believe in. And because if you try to write to a particular market, almost always, that market might not buy it anyways. It's the same with short fiction. Like maybe you're trying to
Mhm.
write a Clarkesworld story, but then what if Neil doesn't want it? For whatever reason, for
Mhm.
a million reasons. And then here you are with this story that you thought was a Clarkesworld story that you wrote, in your mind and heart for Clarkesworld. And it's the same with books, but even more so. Write the things that are important to you.
Mhm.
Believe in your own book, make it the best that you can, and then let the agent try to sell it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a really good transition into one of my questions that gets a little more specific regarding the conference itself. But since you're a critique group leader and you've been to Cascade Writers before, that's where I met you for the first time, actually, was I think 2 years ago at Cascade
Yeah,
Writers.
yeah.
Um, how many
I was
times have you been?
just that once. I was supposed
Oh,
to teach last year, and then they changed the dates. They didn't ask me. They were just like, "Hey, we changed the dates," and I'm like, "Hey, I can't do those dates, so deuces. I hope the
deuces.
year's good."
Yeah.
But then they asked me again, and I was like, "Yeah, I had a really good time the first time, so I'm definitely down to do it again." So yeah.
Well, we're stoked to have you. You are a very easy person to talk to,
Oh,
and
thank you.
your willingness to educate is inspiring and awesome. Because I'll tell you this right now, everybody coming to the conference, if you have a chance to just have a normal conversation with Arley, do it because you'll learn something, whether you want to or not. And
Whether you want to or not, that's real. Whether you want to or not is real.
luckily, I always want to, so it was definitely a standout moment at StokerCon, that our conversation that morning for sure.
I enjoyed hanging out with both of you. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Deanna says hi, by the way.
Yay!
Um,
Hi, Deanna.
I will tell her. But so you have such a vast array of experience in the industry, all different facets, both sides of the pen, so to speak.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a critique group specifically, like what specific skill set and perspectives do you bring to the critique group that your group members will benefit from, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I went to Odyssey um, back in the day in 2014, and I started slushing with Lightspeed shortly thereafter. Shauna McGuire brought me in as lead slusher on a Clears Destroy project that she was editing. Um, and then I've been tied into the short fiction market ever since. I've been having conversations with editors ever since. I've been meeting people in the industry ever since on all levels of all kinds. And And kind of like the instructor at Odyssey, Gene Cavelos, I have a passion for craft. And I also, as someone who is a writer, I also understand, I think, better than a lot of agents and editors, how a writer often might feel about something. But I also believe that as writers, it's on you to be driven to really improve your own craft and your own skill in the ways that are right for you. And so all of those things give me a lot of perspective and skills, both in terms of understanding story and being able to articulate how story works, and how it may land for many people or may not land for many people. And because I'm mixed, I'm half black and half white, and I've traveled a lot. I grew up in England, Hawaii, and Colorado. I spent 4 months in Nepal, a month in India. I studied Asian religions in college. So I'm kind of very multicultural. I'm a polyglot. And so this gives me perspectives that a lot of people don't have. It gives me an open mindedness that a lot of people don't have, which also informs my approach to critique, which is that, there's not just one type of story. There's not just one type of way to write story. There's not just one audience. That said, you still have to figure out how to do what you're trying to do in the best, most effective way possible to have an impact on readers. But what that can look like exactly can look like so many things. And so I think that just gives me, not a unique perspective, but relative to a lot of people I know, it's relatively unique. And I have a relatively unique set of skills. And I have the compassion to be direct because I think that, if you give me your story and I feel like there's three things that aren't working, it doesn't help me to not tell you that. It doesn't help you to not tell you that. I mean, I'm not helping you out by withholding that information. I'm helping you out by saying, these are three things that I think don't work and that some readers may not be able to get into. Here are some potential ideas. But then at the end of the day, I feel like it's my job to empower you to decide for yourself what to do with your story. So I have my ideas, but it's still not my story. I have my experience, I have my perspectives, but at the end of the day, it's up to you. And so ultimately, I feel like my job at the bottom line is to both tell you what I think, but to let you know that it's okay for you to make your own decisions and to do what you feel is right for your story and to experiment and to try different things and to stretch yourself and challenge yourself and to be honest with yourself. Um, so yeah, that's kind of a mangled way of answering the question, but that's basically it.
No, that sounds great. I mean, I definitely agree with you. Like, you can't necessarily save, or maybe not save is the right word, but you can't necessarily like improve your story if you're too worried about saving your own feelings about it, right? You kind of like, by sharing it with a critique group, are opening yourself up to critique, to that vulnerability. And like, I think embracing that is extremely important to actual growth in your craft. And it sounds like you have a very holistic approach to that. So that I appreciate that for sure.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you led a critique group in like a cooperative setting before? As in,
What do
have
you?
you co-led a critique group before? Because I believe
Oh,
you are co-leading with Claire Eddy at this point.
um, have I co-led a critique group before?
Yeah.
I feel like I have, but I don't know for sure. I've done a lot of stuff and it blurs together. But yeah, I'm not sure if I have.
Cool. Well, this will either be the a first and a good time for that, or it'll be a nice repeat, I'm sure. Claire's pretty awesome. I just talked to her yesterday, so I'm excited
Nice,
to see the stories that come out of that group. It'll be very, very productive, I think.
nice.
But yeah, I
What
guess. Oh, sorry. What?
What do you think are the benefits and the challenges of co-leading a critique group or co-running a critique group?
I think it's always beneficial to have various perspectives, right? When it comes to editing and critiquing and thoughtfully reading these stories from all these different perspectives and different authors, because that's one of the cool things about Cascade, right? Is it's not as cool as like StokerCon is. It's all horror. Everybody's there, kind of doing similar things, and there's a benefit to that. But I think something cool about Cascade is it's really helpful for branching out of your genre, branching out of your sort of like genre defined peer group, and meeting a bunch of other people from a bunch of stages in the writing career. So I think it'll be valuable to have somebody like you who comes from a very like writer perspective, and then somebody who like Claire, who actually comes from pretty much almost entirely the other side of the pen, right? Like academia first, and then publishing, and now just like a creative director at Tor, which is obviously a huge thing. And you are honestly like trying to sell to Tor probably in some aspects, you
Hopefully.
know.
I'm sure I will be trying to sell to them many times in the future. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think getting different perspectives is really good. I agree with that. I think the potential challenge is if people have egos. You know, when you're in a critique group, you have to be able to express yourself, but allow other people to disagree with you, and that's not
Yeah.
always easy for people. You know.
Hmm.
But that's writing. There's no single book out there that we're all going to agree on, and we have to sort of come back to that notion that ultimately we're talking about art, and you know, we're never we're never going to find stuff that everybody always agrees on. There's always going to be
Right.
like, oh, I love this, oh, I love this movie. What? You love that movie? That was terrible,
Yeah.
but in the heat of the moment, sometimes we forget that. We forget that it's okay to have different opinions, you know.
Important even, right? Especially in a
Im-
critique group.
Important even. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because like the worst thing in a critique group, the worst two things is like one, if everybody says they like it, and two, if everybody hates it. Like you
I
need that
agree.
perspective from both angles to figure out what's actually. I was actually talking to Claire about this yesterday, but she had said that the editing is less about saying what's wrong with something. Or sorry, this was Cat Rambo. I'm getting my interviews mixed up. But she was saying how much editing is less about cutting away things. I mean, it's about that, but it's more about allowing the things that are good in the story to shine and grow, and like exposing what the story really wants to say. Which reminded me
Yeah.
kind of our conversation about theme and how you should really know your theme. And when a story wanders off track, it's usually because it lost its theme.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was an interesting comparison as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would frame it slightly differently. I would say that, both for an agent and an editor, even at the magazine level as well, for me personally, I
Hmm.
think like an editor's job is to try their very best to understand what the author is trying to do, what the authorial intent is,
Hmm.
and to help the author bring forward the best version of what they're trying to do,
And what are
And
some
yeah,
ways that you can do that in a critique group, do you think?
well, I think the most important thing is really to just have a sense of self-awareness, because I think what often happens in critique groups is we want to get someone to write what we think they should be writing, or to write in the way that we like,
Hmm.
to speak to us as the audience, and we're not always necessarily the audience. It's not always for us. And so I think the most important thing is just having that self awareness and being really in tune with your own motivations.
Hmm.
Um, and after that is to understand who the audience is, how the audience speaks and thinks as much as possible, and to really hone in on what the essence or the most important aspects of the story are, and to examine if those are being delivered in the best way that they can be delivered. And if you feel like there's improvement, to share that, but
Hmm.
to understand that the author doesn't have to agree with you. You know.
Right, right. That's a really good point. Yeah, I always find that helpful in a critique group, even if somebody, prefaces it by recognizing that they're not the audience. That can be really helpful.
Yeah,
Um, because, they'll usually say something to the effect of, this isn't really my kind of story, but here's what I got from it. And
yeah,
that can be really valuable because you never know who's going to pick up your book. And I think we still want our stories to translate to as many people as possible. A lot of the time, where that shouldn't be the overall goal, but it's nice when you can get your message across to people who aren't necessarily your direct target audience. At least I think it is.
I I think the other side of it though is that authors can often be overly attached to something,
Mm.
you know, and you'll hear it when you give some advice and they say, "But I really like that," and it's like, I get that you really like it, but does it work? Does it
Right.
actually work?
Hmm.
Um, and so sometimes there's an emotional attachment that happens, and authors become resistant to changing something, which is different than the author thinking that something actually works better the way that they have it.
Hmm.
Or the author can also see what's being pointed at and find their own way to change it or fix it that
Hmm.
better meets how they want to do it. Because sometimes it's not about a suggestion, it's about just somebody pointing at something and saying, this piece here is like a bit of sand in the shoe, you know? And then the author can discard the suggestion and be like, oh, but let me see if I can play with this a little bit, you know? Um, and so I think authors also have to be honest with themselves about their own motivations and the way that they're looking at a piece or at the story as a whole. And theme is a great example of that, you know, because maybe they like something that the story is doing, but it breaks the theme of the story.
Hmm.
But they're so attached to that one scene, even though it messes up the rest of the story, you know? So, yeah, I think there's, you know, I think, Gene called critique a sacred process. And I love that. Not in the religious sense, but in almost a spiritual sense of like we really have to enter into it with integrity and with an almost spiritual uh, you know, reverence
Hmm.
for the process and treating each other with the respect that we all deserve, basically.
I completely agree with you. I mean, for me, I don't know if there is anything in my life more spiritual than writing, and I genuinely mean that. I don't mean to sound you know, too out there with it or anything, but that's how I feel about it. And I think that most writers who are paying money to come to workshops and putting this much time and traveling from around are probably in a similar position. It's important to us, and so I'm glad that there will be some critique group leaders that are actively cultivating that in the way they approach story critique. So thank you, Arley. It's going to be
Thanks for
awesome.
having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So I guess before we let you go, because I have kept you up to the time I said, and then a little further than that as well. But I blame you because you asked me a question. Um, do
It's not all about me.
this one certainly should be. It should not be. But yes, the conversation was great. So I appreciate you helping me facilitate that. Um, I sent you a question asking for a recommendation of books. Did you have
Yeah,
time to put together a short list? You can also type it to me if you'd prefer to do it that way. I can just release it later.
I did. I mean, there's so many wonderful writers, and I think that, one of the worst things that a new author can tell me is they don't really read or they haven't read anything new that's come out in the last 40 years or something like that. And it doesn't matter what kind of stuff you're writing, but there's so many great books and great short stories out there. But just to name a few, Rebecca Roarenhorse comes to mind. She's wonderful both in her short fiction and her novels. Tananarive Due,
Hmm.
Susan Palumbo. Susan's one of my favorite short fiction authors. She has a book out. I haven't read it yet, but I'm very excited. I don't know, I don't always get to read for pleasure. I don't know if I'll get to read it, but I'm excited that it exists because I love her work so much, and I genuinely want to read it. Ananda Lima just had a book out called Craft: Stories I Wrote for the Devil,
Oh,
which is
nice.
yeah, it's really inventive. It's fantastic. It's one of my favorite books that I've read recently. I reviewed it for Lightspeed, and I hung out with her at StokerCon, and she was wonderful. Of course, my clients, Leslie Penelope, Meg Elison, they're both fantastic writers. Meg Elison's collection, Big Girl, is really fantastic, and Leslie's latest book just dropped, Daughter of the Merciful Deep.
Mm,
Short fiction is a fantastic way to find awesome writers. Check out anthologies like Never Whistle at Night.
yep.
Super great anthology. I got to hang out with these guys at StokerCon. One of my favorite anthologies. Infinite Constellations is another great anthology. And Infinite Constellations challenges the way that we conceive of anthologies. I can't recommend it enough.
Hmm.
Magazines like Correo and Augur, they are great for finding new authors, for finding up and coming talent, and for getting familiar with their work before their books drop. And then being like, oh, yeah, I've been following this person since they published this and that and the other, and I can't wait to read their book. Kind of like me with Susan Palumbo. Yeah, so there's so much great stuff out there.
Hmm.
I think people just have to poke around and look around and search around and read reviews and see what people are posting about that they're excited about and find, you know, the stuff that excites them.
Hmm.
If you're a writer, you should be reading.
I couldn't agree more. That's been a very valuable lesson for me. So yeah, I definitely agree. And thank you for sharing
What
that list.
What about you? Give me one or two that you've really enjoyed lately.
That is Never Whistle at Night is definitely one that always boils to the top. And I'm so in agreement with you about reading short fiction. I have found to be so valuable. And I'm actually slushing right now for Nightmare, so I'm also
Oh,
pretty
nice.
into that. And slushing for Grendel Press. So I've had trouble reading for pleasure lately as well, because I'm slushing for two magazines, and then I'm also editing a novel. So
It's a
but
lot.
it's a lot, and I love reading like at night before bed. But by the time I get to it, I'm like, I think I've already read like 200 pages today, 300 pages today. I'm not reading anymore. But something I just read Oracle by Thomas Olda Hoyvelt, and
Nice.
I'm a huge fan of his. His
Yeah.
work is excellent, and I'm a big fan of that folk fiction, outdoor centric fiction. And he's just one of the modern masters of that, in my opinion. So
Nice.
really, really highly recommend all of his books. I liked Oracle quite a lot. And I also just finished What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman, which is right, if you've read any of his books, it's just as dark and twisted and gross and heartbreaking as his other books. He's excellent author for digesting emotional trauma through fiction, through horror. So highly recommend him as well.
I,
Those are
I
my
love
two favorites right now.
I love that as a use of fiction,
Hmm.
processing, digesting, dealing with all the nastiness of life
Hmm.
through fiction. For me, that makes fiction, it often makes fiction really powerful, you know.
I agree. Yeah, it's what I actively seek that out in fiction for sure. Um,
Nice.
I definitely also really liked Out There Screaming. I thought that was an excellent
Oh,
anthology
nice.
as well. It's getting all the hype, so a lot of people have heard about it now. But I mean, I loved Jelly Clark's story in there, Hide and Seek. That was one of the most genuinely scary horror stories I've read for a long time, especially in the short form. So that one
Nice.
is another awesome one as well.
That's great. John and Jordan. Jordan and
Yep.
John.
I'm stoked that Jordan got into the book publishing game too. It's a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah,
Yeah. He's got a great sense of style and taste, I think.
I think so. Yeah, and he's been entertaining for a long time, so he's very good at that. He's good at picking things that yeah, good at picking the right people and putting people in the right places. I think lots of skills as a producer for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, Arley. I know we went a little over, but I really appreciate you being so generous with that time, and I can't wait to see you at the workshop.
Thanks for having me and chatting with me, Clay. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Always a pleasure. We'll see you there, everybody. We'll see you at Cascade Riders. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.